Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the ODI Fridays lunchtime lecture. Today, we have with us Don Hemingway, who is the head of data at the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, who will be telling us about their data ethics journey. Before we start with the actual talk, I just would like to do a bit of housekeeping and reminding that we are encouraging both our audience here and at home to ask us questions. For our audience here, I will be circulating the microphone so that you can ask a question. For those of you who are at home, please interact with us on Twitter using the hashtag ODI Fridays.
Thank you. So today I'll be taking you through our approach to navigating the advertising networks and our ethical considerations about how we use data and how the networks use our data on our sites. So as we know, the digital sort of data through social networks, advertising networks, and Google Analytics, those types of things, it can be quite opaque. So what we've kind of tried to do is trying to understand the bits where we can understand and make more transparent. How can we understand those better? And because ultimately with these networks, being able to reach those who may need our services or who will support us in providing those services, will often be done through digital channels. So, so we absolutely use these networks, and so they are important. So I'm not sitting here saying they're the devil incarnate, but there are things that we really need to be thinking about when we're using these networks. What I've been sharing has come from a process of continual improvement. It's not like a big bang thing we've done. And sometimes it's actually just been the formalisation of anything that we've done for years and years. So I'm not suggesting our approach is right for everybody, but hopefully some of the questions that we're kind of raising today will be useful in thinking about what is right for other people's organisations. Okay. So, firstly, who are we? So, hopefully most of you know who we are. So, we are a UK-based children's charity around, as we say, it's in the name, preventing cruelty to children. And we kind of do that through many, many ways. So, one of the things we have, for those who don't know, we run the Childline Helpline, which is a place for young people to contact us on the line, on the phone, at any time. It runs 24 hours a day. We had we've come towards the end of our 5-year strategy, which was we had 5 goals to make 5 million children safer during that period. We've already met that. And we also do kind of campaigning campaign the government to try and improve kind of laws, etc. So we've had one around closing the loophole, which ones you might have seen, and kind of Wild West Web, which is about kind of putting some restrictions around some of those kind of big networks. We also are a fundraising organisation. We're predominantly funded by our amazing supporters, and then there's many ways that people support us. So one of the ones that's going on at the moment is one of our Christmas campaigns is around getting your sparkle on at Christmas and being all sparkly at Christmas, which seems kind of quite apt. So, dive straight into it. One of the conversations we've been kind of thinking about is kind of what I was saying earlier, is there's a whole bunch of conversations we need to think about, not just from a compliance view. I mean, we all understand the need for compliance and making sure that we are legally right. But is compliance, is that legal framework enough? Actually, should we be thinking about that? So what we kind of did, we actually started by having a big workshop, which included people from across our organisation. So that could be children's services practitioners, that was marketeers, that was data people, that was digital people. So there's people from the front line as well as the kind of the behind the scenes. And these are the sorts of questions that we were kind of asking. But what it did mean is that we are kind of thinking about the whole spectrum of kind of those kind of different views, because everyone comes with different pieces of experience. They understand, some will understand how it, physically impacts children and young people. Others are kind of thinking of it from a marketing point of view, on fundraising point of view, so the balance, making sure that we're balanced across all of those things. And these are sorts of questions. I don't like talking, just repeating what's on a slide, but ultimately for us, from an ethical standpoint, it was about having clear principles and a framework that we could work within that was not only compliant, but also works with us within our kind of organisational context and kind of what we stand for. So this kind of was the starting point. And actually off the back of this, we now actually have a digital and data ethics board. So whenever we're looking at doing something different or new, like say, for example, we want to work with a new social network or whatever it might be, it goes to this board for discussion. And it's a lively discussion, and it's a really positive thing that comes out of there. And it kind of works really, really well. But as I say, I appreciate that's not for everyone, but that's something that really works for us. Because, as I mentioned, because we have all these different elements, we have lots of different audiences. So we have young people who are our audiences and who we're trying to offer, make sure are aware of our services. We have, adults who use our helplines or using us to get information. There is, and also there are adults who are basically supporting us actually deliver this. So, there are different needs for those different for those different audiences and cohorts. So, lots of things to think about, which I appreciate for some people is not as complex. Okay, so I'm a data person, and we're at the Open Data Institute. So, we always start with mapping the data. So, one of the things we started to think about was we did regularly do tag audits. And so we kind of took all of those tags. This is a simplified version. I like to point out it was a much more complicated. We basically took our kind of, the sorts of cookies and tags that we had on our site, and we started to look at what data is actually sent back to these networks. What's one of the interesting things is obviously if you're using things like Google Analytics or Facebook or whoever it might be, they provide you with the tagging and the cookies that you need to use. And often out of the box, they will automatically do things that have actually got to remember they're supplying these in that way for a reason. They want that data, they want that information. So you kind of need to not only understand what it's sending, but also what other aspects within the kind of cookie and what is restrictable. And quite often there are things that are restrictable, but I'll come on to that a little bit later. So, as I say, mapping the data was a start. Well, tag audit was a starting point, and then following on with the mapping of the data. So hopefully that's one practical thing we absolutely did. Because if you don't understand what's going where from your website, then you're how can you actually think about it from an ethical point of view? The other thing as well is what you got to remember is on these IP is going across. That's personal information under GDPR, so that it has a legal requirement attached to it. So something to think about when you're thinking about this stuff. I think quite often we think about our transactional data, our names, addresses, email addresses being personal. We forget about IP. So, one thing is, can we actually control all the tracking? So one of the things that we kind of started to think about is all the different places our audiences come to our website. And there's lots of different, and it's not limited to these, but it kind of starts to give you a view. People go on to, and if you we are a user of Google Analytics, it's free. We are we have limited budgets and resources. We have to take advantage of these things. And as standard, Google Analytics, as the default, will be integrated with the Google network. There are settings you can switch off, but even if you did, what would that mean? So we also started having conversations as a group what if we turned off all of the tracking? And what would that mean? That has an impact on kind of people, retargeting and things like that, which we might need from a fundraising point of view. But there was something else that became really clear. So we looked at our Childline website, and what we found is that 84% of traffic to that website was accessing it via a Google product. And therefore, we had no control over what that tracking was. So even if we turned off every piece of tracking on that website, there was still going to be tracking. Now, that's part of the value exchange you have with Google. When you buy an Android phone, you use Chrome, or you use Google Search. There's a reason these products are free. But that's something really important to think about. So if you have, as we do, young people and potentially vulnerable adults as well, and vulnerable young people, we really need to think about how that stuff is happening and where it's going. So one of the things that, so talking about, so we can actually, within Google Analytics, you can actually turn off the integration. The other thing that they have in there is an enhanced privacy setting. So what that does is partially mask the IP address. So if you think of a postcode like EC2A3NH, that's our postcode, by partially masking, you end up restricting it to EC2A, which kind of, it still means that there is there's still a device ID, which obviously is linked to a device and a browser, but it still is starting to limit. What it also does, and so it means that they can't pinpoint exactly where that person is. So it just offers, it's only a small level of protection, but it is a level of protection. What it also does means is that they can't use that IP, nobody can use that IP address to connect with other data sources and create that full picture. So when we're thinking about the audiences we have on going onto our websites, that's something it'd be useful to have a think about. And these settings are there, and actually it's great that Google have these settings, but quite often we don't use them because we're not even aware that they're actually there. So this is where we haven't integrated, and it kind of comes back to my point around the fact that the vast majority of things are still kind of, no, this isn't us necessarily sharing anything with the Google network. This is about how it kind of tracks through from kind of the device you're on. But so, this is absolutely the way we have now gone across our websites. So for obvious reasons, but but across the board. So something to think about, and the reality is, although I'm talking about Google Analytics here, it could be any other tool. The only kind of ones, there are tools out there where you can kind of store all the data on your own platforms, and that's something we're looking for some of our websites at the moment, but just something to have a think about. Okay, social media. So unsurprisingly, and I'm sure this is true for any brand out there, significant traffic comes to our websites through social media advertising, and and if we're trying to reach young people, that's the platforms that they're on. They're a communication channel, ultimately. So an interesting stat. I was shocked by this one. I haven't got the source with me, but I know it's correct. Is that Snapchat, for example, 85% of young people go on Snapchat every day, and that goes up to 90% for females in the UK. This is UK kind of teenage years. So, it's really important that we're on those platforms. But in fact, by doing integrations with these kind of social networks, we're actually sharing data back. So coming back to my earlier point, if you have got something sensitive on your website that people, like we do, people might be coming to look for information on child abuse, for example. It's really important. We don't really want to be sharing that back. So that's sort of, again, coming back to the tracking the data, thinking about who your audience is, what information they're looking at. And ultimately we have to use these. They're effective communication, for effective communication strategies. However, we also need to think about that. So what quite often comes back to the value exchange. The value exchange of putting these on your website is it helps you kind of follow an individual through the process. So for Childline, for example, we do not put these on our website. YouTube's slightly different, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we don't have these trackers on our website. But we know that it limits us from a kind of reach and a marketing point of view. And I use marketing, it's more information sharing than it is marketing, but it's the same principles. But something to think about. Okay, so YouTube. This is specific. This is a specific one for us. So, as I said, we have, as a charity, we have limited budgets, resources. And we also know that, young people go onto YouTube and watch a lot of videos. It makes sense, and also adults, and we are reaching both. We have a lot of videos on YouTube. Does it make sense? When we were kind of starting this journey years and years ago, it kind of made financial sense for us to embed the YouTube videos within our website. Actually, but one of the things, and funnily enough, as we'd been going through this earlier this year, one of the things we talked about is we didn't want to do that anymore. So actually one of the things we were already looking at is kind of looking at a self-hosted solution. So YouTube also out of the box, cookie. This is another one little snippet that people often aren't aware of. The cookie will basically, if you've got the cookie and you've got a YouTube video on your web page, it will fire, it will send the data to YouTube irrelevant of whether that video is watched or not. Again, there is a setting inside the YouTube cookie which stops you doing that. So it will only send the data once it's fired. So coming back to you've got to question these things, and you've kind of got to look a little bit deeper. There's like I say, there's a value exchange here. That's why these things work the way they do. But it's just one of those constantly thinking about questioning those elements. Also, YouTube have just changed their T's and C's. For those who don't know, I would hope most people who are working with people under 18 would know this. And they've now changed their age requirements to say that you have to be 13 to be able to use the site. Anyone younger than that should be going to YouTube Kids. And if you are under 18, you need to have your parent or guardian's consent to do so. Obviously, and if we use hosted, so there's a good job we were already looking at this, because if we were hosting YouTube videos on our website, as we do right now, although we're in the process of moving that, what that would mean is we could potentially be pushing young people through YouTube, which we shouldn't want to do. That's not to say we shouldn't be on these platforms, because that's where we kind of get that reach, but it is something we need to consider. So, this is kind of a summing up slide. Think about, this is kind of the more practical approach pieces. So thinking about those enhanced privacy settings on Google Analytics or whatever analytics platform you're using. One of the things we've put on some of our websites, especially where young people are involved, we've put visible signposting to encourage opt-out of tracking, so people can opt out of tracking. So something to think about. One of the things we do at the NSPCC is we actually get to go and speak to young people about this and to understand what they understood. And what was interesting is they had a far better understanding of this than maybe a lot of adults do. And we actually had this whole conversation about, we got to think about who we're protecting. So something to think, so that's one thing I will say. They have a very clear understanding of what this, and they understand it's that exchange. Also think about those beyond kind of your analytics platform, what are those enhanced privacy settings that you can set? So I've talked about YouTube, I've talked about the fact that we don't put social tracking on our Childline website, but there's also things, so for example, on some parts of our Childline website and our .org website, we have no tracking at all because it's just not appropriate to do so. So again, that's thinking about the who, the what, the how, etc. And the other thing is, something we fortunately have always had, is a robust tag management process for governance. So making sure that we have a way of kind of following through and understanding, how do we get off that sign-off process? Who is it that needs to go to? Where does it get discussed? And then slightly more strategically, one of the things we've actually, coming out of the board, we've actually have written a paper which we abide by internally, a clear set of ethical principles and policies, what we will and we won't do across our various audiences, websites, etc. They're most relevant to us, so I didn't think it was worth sharing those. A clear, comprehensive governance framework, so making sure that we can follow those processes, it's all documented, etc. We're in the process of implementing a cookie management tool with data privacy at its heart, and not just necessarily going for an out-of-the-box one, because what we found is quite often those cookie management tools that are out there share the data with the advertising network, so considering that. The other thing as well is we're thinking about, we need to be transparent about this, hence why I'm allowed to come and talk to you today about it. And it needs to be clearly articulated in plain English for everyone to see. It's no good if nobody can understand this. This is on our intranet. We've done training across the organisation. We've made sure that everyone really understands this from the top to the bottom. There's also a charity digital code of practice for those who don't know that. I mean, whether you're a charity or not, I think that's a really good starting point to look at all the different options that are available. It kind of is quite comprehensive and quite useful. So kind of some more strategic, so we've got some practical level-based approaches and some kind of strategic approaches there. This is kind of our digital ethics review process. As I say, we've kind of got this is kind of thinking, this is an example of where we really need to think about what that is, you know. And one of the key things for us, as well as the compliance process, obviously, is we need to consider first, should we do it, rather than can we do it? And I think that's quite a key distinction. Quite often, you know, we'll see a case study and get all excited because, oh yeah, we could do that, and we could do this, and we could do that. But we, you know, we think about that can, but really, if we come from a place of should, that really helps. And, you know, and it's interesting, we've had some interesting conversations internally about, you know, our shoulds versus, you know, a commercial organisation shoulds as well. So it's quite an interesting thing. But again, just making sure it has a very clear process that we aren't, you know, you aren't going to get kind of stuck, we aren't going to get stuck and lost and it will kind of go down a big black hole. So some final thoughts. So it's about information, having all the information in an easy to consume way. So something that everyone can do. So that data mapping, that tag audit, ensuring all levels of the business understand this. So we've definitely had people going into our board and basically doing presentations and training on this. Having a clear view of the ecosystem and what is happening, and that's kind of understanding all those different bits. Thinking about the data privacy landscape, as I say, we could have gone with a kind of cookie management tool that was lots of other people have gone with, and we've chosen not to do that because we wanted a specific approach to that. Having clear principles and an ethical framework that goes beyond that compliance, so everyone is and that it has consensus, and the consensus is the key, because there's no point one part of the organisation thinking that this is right and another part thinking it's not, and that's where that pan-organisation group comes through. Ask questions, I think, is also really important. You know, as I said, as we've kind of gone through this continual improvement process, we keep finding little settings that you can change that if you don't know about. So when you're working with vendors or suppliers or whoever it might be, ask the questions. Understand what the defaults are. Understand what those what other options there is. I mean, we had one we discussed the other day. I won't say who it was, where an email address has to be sent back, and we kind of went, no, we can't use that then. We're now looking at alternative ways of that, but those are the sorts of but very easily that could have been implemented and not really thought about. So, as I say, kind of thinking about all of those things. So, can't do it. So, in short, this is an ongoing journey for us. I'm not suggesting we are, done. I think we will forever be going forward with this. We will forever be questioning and making sure. And I'm sure, as new people come into the organisation, we will continue to look at things. And I'm not suggesting we have everything down pat. But it's really important that we kind of evolve that over time, and we need to ensure, but at least we know we're in the right place to start that. And and not just thinking about that legal compliance aspect, but kind of thinking about the kind of the vision of GDPR, and actually thinking about what is right and what we should do. But we also understand that we ultimately have to leverage the benefits that digital bring, because that's how we connect. So that's me. Questions?
Right. Thank you very much for a great talk. Yeah, thank you. Questions? Who wants to ask the first one? Right. If you can also introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. My name's Majid, and I'm actually in Dawn's team, but I know very little about this, which is why I'm asking a question. Do you think for the sector this is quite a rare thing? Do you think it'll take an incident or some sort of scandal for others to wake up to it, or?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Is it growing?
Yeah, I mean, again, I won't mention what it was, but we had a board session the other day where we were literally having a conversation about so the board goes more than just this, it covers wider data as well. And we were talking about, could we do this with some data? And, and while we absolutely take the view, we will not necessarily follow what everyone else is doing, because we have to look at that for ourselves. There was a comment made, well, lots of other charities are doing this, and then it's coming back to who's in the room. We have someone from press in the room, and they said that exact point. It's like, well, if there was a scandal in this, could there be a scandal about this? it isn't illegal, but actually is that what people would expect from a charity, for example, or from us, for example. We only think about us, but we're thinking about the sector as well. So I think that potentially could happen. And I think what's interesting is we think about things like the social networks and the advertising and Google and all the rest of it. The kind of the media is kind of very clearly looking at them, and governments and all the rest of it. So I can't help but feel that some of the things that are going on in this area are going to ultimately end up being tightened up, and which may end up leading to a scandal anyway. But so effectively, what I hope is by us taking this approach and being further along than just covering the legal requirements, we will be in a place where if there was a scandal or if there was changes, we'll actually be in a really good stead to be able to manage that and actually be able to hold our hands up and say, we've been doing this anyway.
Hi, I'm Ellie from William Joseph, who are a digital and design agency working with a lot of charities, and I think it's really, really interesting and fantastic what you've managed to achieve. I'm very much from a marketing background, so this question you may not be able to answer, but I'm really interested to hear how marketing and digital teams have taken to this approach and how they would think about, from a marketing team from a charity, whether they would see, I think they would completely understand, putting myself in their shoes, that the data sending back is not okay, but how they are adapting to some of the because sites are completely not being tracked, for example, when they may feel that they're evolving and making changes that are better for the people using it rather than wanting to do anything kind of malicious.
And as I say, marketing and digital are absolutely on our ethics board. So, like I say, we have the spectrum.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And what was interesting is one of the boards a while ago, due to an incident that was happening, they couldn't join the meeting. And there was a couple of areas we decided to postpone till they were in the room because we knew that they would have very strong views on it. And then we kind of get in the room. So, so this is the whole point. Everyone's thinking, we have someone from our online safety team in there. We have people from our marketing team. We have children's services practitioners. That's the point. By us all being in a room together, all listening to what each other are saying, we can come up with that balanced view. And what's been really good about this is by having that transparency, by making sure that everyone really understands what this is doing, that really helps that conversation. So, I talk about retargeting, for example. So it might be, so there's lots of different parts of this. It might be there's some areas where we feel that that's appropriate, and there'll be other areas where it's absolutely not. So, and that's where we have to understand those different audiences. We can't just look at this as a blanket, however much some of us might want to do that. But that's something we always have to balance off. We are predominantly as I said earlier, predominantly funded by our amazing supporters. If it wasn't for them, we would not be here. So we do have to be able to kind of cover that as well. So having that balance is really important. And what it's actually meant is that services start to understand those kind of pressures that marketing and digital teams and fundraising teams are on, but they also understand what the service teams are kind of, it's like, well, if we did that, we'd be hypocrites type thing, type thing. So I'm not saying it's a perfect science, but we kind of muddle through. And, the other thing as well is, we might have the same conversation every board, about something because, we haven't quite found, we've got an agreement on a consensus on where we are, but there's still that kind of ongoing need to see it. And, this space is changing so much on a regular basis, as the YouTube thing will testify, that we have to constantly be looking at those things.
Thanks.
Sorry, just going to come here.
Hi there, my name's Gwilym. I work for a company called the Information Lab. So I found that once you move past questions of compliance with regulations, there's always about as many opinions on data ethics as there are people in the room. So I'd love to hear more about what sort of strategies you used for building consensus during these workshops, because I always find that you've got the whole spectrum, and it's very, very difficult to find a set of ethical principles that actually everyone is on board with. And as a follow-up to that, once you have got a set of ethical principles, how do you then go about, I don't like using words like enforcing them, but how do you make sure that everyone's actually complying with them rather than just saying, oh yeah, I'm acting ethically in line with our things, and then just doing their own thing because no one's like over their shoulder or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first part of your question is very similar to the answer that I've just given over here. It's, I mean, you know, this didn't happen. We didn't get to a consensus in a half-hour meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, this is hours and hours and hours of conversation. But I think understanding all sides of the kind of argument really helped find that consensus.
Were there specific steps you took as part of that?
Lots of workshops, literally just all those people in a room or on a call, whatever, you know, for hours at times.
Just genuinely just the length of time and the amount of work?
Yeah, and it literally was until we got there. I mean, we kind of went with things on the board that we then discussed. It wasn't just like we turned up with a blank page and went, what should we do? Mm-hmm. So, you know, we started with some information on a board. You know, here's some suggestions. You know, is this okay? Is this not okay? So we took some existing user cases, some that we knew people wanted to do as well. And we kind of literally went through it on a user case basis. So, you know, if we wanted to do this, how do people feel about it? But then being clear, if we did this, this is what's shared, this is who it's shared with, this is the impact, no, this is the audience, you know, thinking about all of those things, which then helped that conversation. So I think the user cases really helped that part of the conversation. There's the first thing. Remind me of the second question again?
The second one.
Enforcing, not that I like to use that word. So, as I say, training has been a key part of that, making sure everyone understands that. Fortunately for us, all tracking goes through our digital data team, which sits with me, hence why I'm doing this. And they are our gatekeepers. So in theory, nothing should. So while a conversation might happen in the silo, or when it comes to having to be able to physically get it on the platform, we have gatekeepers there, and that will force that. But like I say, training and making sure, you know, all the information's available, people are clear what the process is, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that gatekeeper. So you ultimately do need that gatekeeper. You can't just have it as a platform as a free fall to go do what you want with.
May I ask a quick follow-up question?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So quick follow-up on the arriving at consensus through just like a lot of workshops. Did you find that was definitely like sort of consensual consensus, or was it more like consensus through attrition, where people are like, you know what, this is the 10th workshop I've had on this, fine, whatever?
We definitely didn't have 10 workshops. We got there quicker than that.
Okay.
And I think that's where the user cases came in really helpful. Because what we tend to found is after about 4, 5, 6 user cases, there were some clear themes coming out of that. And then we kind of noted those themes. And then if like we could see that, you know, and that's kind of that's how the principles and policies came about, was literally through those things. That's kind of how we did. So which made it a little bit easier.
Great, thank you.
Question from Twitter from Leonie. She says, thanks, Dawn. How do you go about governance for this process, given it has to evolve and decisions will be ongoing? And how has the NSPCC gone about ownership and managing that process?
So we have the board, which is kind of where, so we have somewhere we can always take these conversations to. So we have that as part of our framework for moving forward. We have clear processes and gatekeepers, so which kind of helps enforce it. Don't like that word, but make sure we follow the process. In my team, we have a senior kind of data governance lead. I appreciate not all organisations can have that, and this kind of sits with her, and she kind of organises that. So I think there's a few things that we've put in place, and I think ultimately the fact that we have that gatekeeper, that nobody can go past the gatekeeper to get something on the website without us knowing about it, and the fact that we regularly do kind of audits and all of that kind of stuff to make sure that that's, you know, there's nothing rogue there, then that's kind of part of it. As I say, the board's been in place for we started our workshops earlier, so the board itself has been in for a few months, so we're still, as I say, not suggesting we have this all down pat and we are in a kind of place where I'm sure that things will come up as we go along, but it's about coming back to my beginning point around continuous improvement. That's where we are now. We've kind of got the foundations in place. It's now kind of identifying where those gaps are and continually improving it.
And I've got a follow-up myself as head of marketing and membership here at the ODI. You were saying that you've been speaking to young people and people using the website to get their reactions and thoughts. How do they actually feel about how the data about them is being used on the site? How advanced is their understanding, and how much do they seem to care about it?
So they cared on certain parts of the site. So, I mean, one of the things we've never had is tracking on anywhere near our chat services. So we have online chat services. We've never had tracking there, for example. And that was something they felt very strongly about too. And so I think we were definitely in a consensus there. But yeah, so it's overall, actually, they were less worried than we thought they were going to be. It's some, you know, and it's something that we're looking at going back out again and continuing to make sure we're getting that feedback. They definitely had a clear understanding of what, by going on websites and accepting cookies and all the rest of it. And like I say, with all the new cookie tools that are out there now, we're starting to be able to say no. We also on some of our websites have a very clear, like I say, a clear opt-out for tracking. So, you know, it's interesting. Yeah, they've grown up with this stuff, so they kind of they seem to have quite a good understanding. That shouldn't mean that we should be lax about that. We should still be as robust as we're being. But yeah, and we continue to check that temperature. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing. But I would say, yeah, we were expecting a different response when we kind of put it out. But I think that was based on us rather than them, and that was why it's really important to go out to young people and get their input.
Do we? Oh.
Final one, I promise. It seems from a kind of objective perspective, it seems quite straightforward to say this tracking is harmful or this activity is harmful. We put children first, therefore we stop doing it. There will always be another side to that, in my eyes, in terms of loss of data, right? So there's analysis you can do to say, you know, users coming from a certain region or engaging in a certain way. Have we lost that, and how are we coping with that?
There is definitely things that we've had to give up as part of this. Definitely, 100%. You know, if you think about the information you can get from tracking social media on your website and through to your website and follow someone through that whole journey, we definitely lose that. However, this is where you have to kind of look at it at those different cohorts, and you know, in some areas it might be okay, in some areas it might not. This comes back to my point: is we have been very clear as part of a board what impact that would have, and that's why it's really important to have marketers, digital teams, etc. in that board, so that we can absolutely clearly and transparently understand the impact to our organisation. However, I personally, this is a personal opinion, not an NSPCC opinion, think actually it forces us to be more creative. You know, makes us think about just, you know, as I say, you know, it looks like things are tightening up in this area. We're already kind of thinking beyond that now. So actually that potentially puts us a kind of a step ahead of where many people might be. So I think, although there is definitely a negative, I think there is actually, it forces us to be a little bit more creative in how we do things.
Do we have any more questions? Any more questions from Twitter? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And thank you for all the questions.